What's up, everybody? Welcome back. You're listening to the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com, one of the Inside Carolina network of podcasts. I'm Joey Powell, your host. With me, as always, are the stars of the show, the guys that bring the real insight, the butchers in the meat shop, the cooks in the kitchen, the guys that do the real work around here, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. What's up, fellas?
How you doing?
Good, man. Sherrell, what's up with you? Fruit snacks good?
Oh yeah, they were delicious, and
All right.
just trying to stay away from these bad beats.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's the story of our life, especially this time of year, right? While we're at it, I want to tell everybody that I appreciate you listening. Want to make sure you take a second to give us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. The reviews actually help Inside Carolina's content pop to the top so that it makes it easier for other people who are searching to hear this stuff. It helps them see it easier. So make sure give us a review if you like it. If you don't like it, let us know because we don't want to make bad stuff. We want to put good content out there for you. And we want to make sure that we're satisfying what you've come to expect from InsideCarolina.com. And as always, we are sponsored by our friends over at Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. They just finished an amazing Black Friday sale, which everything, it seems like they had marked down. But make sure you're checking them out right now. They've got a lot of the new wintertime Nike stuff, which is pertinent to the gentlemen that are on this podcast right now. Make sure you hit them up. If you're an Inside Carolina premium subscriber, use that discount, get your extra 10 off of whatever their current lowest price is, which you can't beat that. And if you've been listening to Inside Carolina Live on Saturdays, which why would you not, on chapelboro.com, we always do a giveaway during the show. So take whatever we give you. You can get down to the store or head online, shop, hit them up, but take care of Johnny T-Shirt because they take care of us and we want to take care of you. Boys, with that said, got the business out of the way. And speaking about business, tell me about Robert Dillingham. I've seen and heard some scuttlebutt about this guy, seen some names. I know we did a story about him recently on InsideCarolina.com, but Sherrell, I'll go to you first. Who is Robert Dillingham and why should our listeners and readers care?
So yeah, he is a 6'2" self-reported guard out of Combine Academy in Lincolnton, North Carolina, which is just north of Charlotte. And he's coached by Jeff McGinnis at Combine. And he's probably the player I think North Carolina has had the most interest in this early in 2023, which is the sophomore class. So definitely doing a lot of work early. You know, they've talked to some 2022, and he's among the lead group so far in 2023. Really, he's a scorer, man. I think that's the thing when talking to people, talking to McGinnis, and talking to some scouts and people who've seen him play a ton. He's wired to score. That's what he does best. He's very confident. He's a good shooter. McGinnis, you know, we talked to him for our intro story a couple of weeks ago, and he thinks, you know, maybe he was exaggerating a bit, but he's like really firmly believes he could come in and score in college today as a sophomore. That he just has that kind of ability. Over the summer, I mean, he put up some crazy numbers. He had a couple of 50-point games during AAU ball, which, you know, even if the defense is lacking, like it sometimes does in grassroots basketball, putting up 50 against other, you know, decent players is still a big deal. So I think that's kind of where they're at. He played against the North Carolina JV team actually in January in the Smith Center and had like 29 points as a freshman. I believe
It's hard to
it
score
was.
50 points against air.
Right,
Right.
exactly. And then 29 points against the Carolina JV team as a freshman. A lot of those JV guys played high school basketball, so they're not, you know, they're not elite college athletes or
Right.
anything. They're not terrible, and he's a 14-year-old kid. And then Carolina is the school that he has talked about and, you know, frankly said he wants to go to. So there's a lot in favor of UNC in that recruitment, and I think the next step is an offer, and that, you know, that could be coming at any time.
All right. And, you know, you mentioned he's 6'2" ish, self reported. But at that age, we've seen guys. I mean, you always hear about Anthony Davis, right? Like kids that grow so much once they get to high school. And while he may not end up being 6'11", he could still grow a little bit. And if he's already got that ability to score, that's remarkable. Sean, you've seen this kid play a little bit. What jumps out at you when you're watching him?
Unfortunately, I haven't seen him in person, but was able to watch some of the live stream over the weekend. And, you know, the 6'2" reported, it's always easier to size him up when you're in person, but I would have to guess that's a little bit of a exaggeration at this point. He definitely looked a little smaller. I mean, he's kind of a slight, you know, small frame. So on the court, you know, it definitely looks like one of the youngest guys, one of the smaller guys, but as Sherrell mentioned, I mean, he can shoot the lights out, even at 15 or as early in his sophomore year. He has really NBA range. I think the thing that was most impressive to me was just his dribble ability in terms of like his 1-2, either his between the legs or between the legs behind the back, how quick it was, and how smoothly he could do that and get it into a shot. So there's really no wasted motion. And when he did that, he basically just frees the defender. And as I said, he has range. So right off the bat in the game yesterday, first possession, pull up 3-pointer. I think he had 13 in the first half. It was a blowout of a game. So he had 1-3 in the second half, but really didn't play much of the second half of the third or the fourth quarter. But in addition to his ability to score, he liked to push the ball. He had pretty good vision. Definitely had some turnovers and some careless, things that he did. But at the same time, the talent was obvious. In the first half, had a fast break dunk that he got up and showed some of the athleticism. But it was definitely impressive, his shooting as well as just his playmaking for such a young age.
I'm glad you mentioned his handle. I was going to ask, how does a kid that slight of frame get his own shot? But it sounds like from what you were saying, it's just his comfortability and his quickness with his handle is what really gets him that separation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're going to be seeing that a lot more now that people are looking at Trae Young and seeing what he does. But yeah, it was really kind of that 1-2 movement, and there wasn't a lot of wasted dribbles. It was always just super quick 1-2 into driving or into a shot. And every time the defender, once again, would basically freeze, and with that, Dillingham could kind of do what he wanted. So even if it was a taller defender, he would gain that really 1 or 2 seconds of freedom to get kind of an uncontested shot.
Awesome.
And from a recruitment standpoint, it's funny following the storylines. To me, it's starting to track a little bit similar to Leaky Black's. And for those who don't remember, back in 2015, Steve Robinson saw Leaky. I think it was November maybe of 2015, and he liked what he saw. And Roy Williams went and watched him about 3 weeks later in early December of 2015. We happened to be at the game, and Leaky didn't perform the best, but I think Roy, kind of saw glimpses of what he thought could be a really good player. And 4 days later, he offered, and then Leaky committed about a month later. Now, I'm not saying a commitment or offer are imminent, though we think an offer, could come at any time. But, you start talking about Roy Williams watching a player now on video. He's seen him in the Smith Center. There's the McGinnis factor. You start to add all that stuff up. The kid is called North Carolina his dream school. And, it could be a scenario where if there's an offer, he's a very early commitment. And so a spring semester, or excuse me, a late fall semester or early spring semester of your sophomore year commitment isn't something that Carolina hasn't had before. Kendall Marshall committed very early in the fall of his sophomore semester, and Leaky Black committed very early in the spring semester of his sophomore season. So just something to look out for. And the other part of it is, I think Carolina, they're in a good spot now, but it's curious to see how long that holds if they don't offer. I think very similar to Day'Ron Sharp when he was playing with Gardner Road. We were told over and over, like, they need to get on him, because if they don't, the other guys are coming, and they might make it a little bit harder for you than if you just offer now and he'll commit a couple months later, which is what happened with him. So I think that's kind of what the UNC staff is weighing. It's very hard to project what someone's going to look like when they're a sophomore versus a freshman in college. But I'm curious to see how Roy Williams and the staff weighs that, and that will ultimately, I guess, decide whether or not he gets an offer sooner rather than later.
Sean, anything else to add?
No, I mean, I'm definitely interested to kind of see how he progresses. Normally, and I know going back to 2019, USA Basketball had a few freshmen come into camp. He was not one of them, but I assume he probably would have been one, going in either this past year or next year. So it will be nice to get to see him in person. But I think definitely with Combine, their games are live streamed and they play a pretty good schedule. So it should be fun to track him going forward. But yeah, definitely a guy that can score, and it'll be interesting to see how his body hopefully starts to fill out down the road.
All right. Well, that's the inside scoop, if you will, about Robert Dillingham. Keep your eyes out. There should be some developments, or at least this is trending as if there could be some developments relatively soon around him and a potential offer. Boys, why don't we talk about the current team? And last time we did one of these shows, we didn't have real live basketball to talk about. There was no scrimmages. There's no secret scrimmages this year because of COVID. There's no preseason games. But since then, we've actually had a handful of real live competitive basketball games. And I'll throw a softball to start with. I'll let you throw it up first, Sean. What was your take having seen this team for the first time in live action?
I think pros and cons with everything. I was able to go back and kind of rewatch some of the quote unquote Maui Invitational, and I mean, at one, it's definitely an improved team from last year. I think last year's team might have even lost to UNLV getting down like they did. I think it's one of the things what we've been seeing is how do Caleb Love and RJ Davis, how have they been doing? And at times there's glimpses of wow, these guys are really good, and then other times there's glimpses of these guys being freshmen. There's a lot more talent on the team, so with that, I think you're seeing a lot of different lineups, and even sometimes in the game where two people are doing the same thing, or not really,
Yeah.
being as sharp or crisp as one would like. I think having one loss is not the end of the world. Sure, it would have been nice to have come back and won the Invitational going
Dude,
into Iowa.
half the of America has one loss at this point. I think you're in vogue if you're doing that.
So as I said, pros and cons. I've been, I think the freshmen have played well. Obviously, the shooting and turnovers is an issue. Sharp, I think, man, his passing has been fantastic, as has his energy. I know over the summer we talked about these games without any fans, and sometimes whoever's going to bring the energy is going to be the team that gets the job done. And he's really been the guy on UNC that is coming off the bench and bringing the energy and being the vocal guy, despite how quiet he used to be in high school at times. But then obviously there's still the issues of the scoring droughts, the 3-point shooting, the missed free throws, the turnovers. So a lot of things that need to be worked on, but I think there's obviously a higher ceiling than last year.
Sherrell, same to you. Just initial high level impressions. I'm going to hit you with the real questions here in a second, but high level impressions. What was your first reaction?
The front line is as advertised. We talked about, a ton of times over the last few months, just about how the strength of the team was going to be the front court. They were going to play bully ball. It was going to be like an offensive line, just running wishbone at you time after time and after time, kind of a Paul Johnson almost offense, like in basketball. And I think that's rung true because, I mean, it's tough for them to score on the outside right now. I think that goes to the other part is I didn't think they would be a great or even good 3-point shooting team, but I didn't think they would be bad again. And again, it's only 4 games. And throughout college basketball, I think guys aren't shooting well, which is
Yeah.
surprising. Like, another thing we talked about was how will not having crowds and all that stuff impact, the games and the scoring. In the NBA, it was kind of a NBA on steroids, for lack of a better phrase, as far as shooting and offense, where everybody was making everything. Guys
Everybody
you
was
never
good.
heard of. Yeah, everybody was great, and people are getting paid now because of it. But in college basketball, it's been the other way. Like, everybody is struggling, maybe except for Iowa, who we'll talk about in a second, struggling to score. I mean, Kentucky just lost by 17 points to Georgia Tech. I mean, that's
The
not what
Georgia Tech team that has 2 bad losses, right?
Yeah, it's North Georgia and Georgia State or something. They
Georgia
only
State
scored
and Mercer.
and
We all
Mercer.
remember Mercer.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Mercer.
Yeah.
And so, Kentucky only had 62 points. So I think you're just seeing, not to make excuses, but I think you're seeing COVID really impacting things. Guys just haven't been in the gym nearly as much. There was months and months off for a lot of people.
Mhm.
I think that's reflected in Carolina. So I think the bigs are as advertised. I'm surprised by the shooting. Not that I expected them to be great, but I expected them to be a little bit better. I've been fine with the freshman guards. It's what freshman guards do, particularly at Carolina. It is trying to learn how to mold kind of your thought process and mold playing instinctually. And that's just something that they'll learn over time. It just takes a little bit. It takes more than 4 games. But
No,
I think
Sherrell, they're supposed to walk on their first game, and they're supposed to be amazing, and they're not allowed to make any
right
any mistakes. I
now,
don't care what class they are. That's what
right
I've
now,
been told.
Granted, I'm not making excuses for them because there has been some poor play, but I think part of it is attributable to them just not maybe knowing what to do, and then part of it is just mistakes and things that they hope will get cleaned up. So those are my big takeaways: is that they'll get better, but there are things to be concerned about.
I love your comment about the shooting, and it's something that makes me think of is the shooting that was supposed to come from guys like Walton and Puff Johnson, and they just haven't seen the minutes yet. And so you'd like to think that as those guys get more acclimated, fit in, get more minutes, and the team just gets used to each other, that the shooting should improve. It may not
Right.
turn them into a 50% shooting team from behind the arc, but I'm with you. I do think it'd be better.
And
And
Caleb is a better shooter than what he's
right.
shown so
Well,
far.
you've seen that. You can see that in his stroke. I mean, not to
Right.
step on Sean's thing here and analyzing a guy's shot, but you can see that he's got some fluidity. It's not a lot of effort in his release. So you got to think that that'll come eventually. I also like your point about just some of the guys not being where they're supposed to be. Sean, I think that was you earlier. I mean, you can see some of the spacing issues, and again, that's the type of thing that's really fixable. And as these guys get more accustomed to playing with each other, Sherrell, I'll follow up with this question: what has surprised you about this team?
What has surprised me about this team?
Could be good or
Um,
bad.
yeah, the free throw shooting is a surprise. Um, and honestly, the turnovers are a surprise because the idea is that if you're going to have two guys who can play the point guard spot, then that should eliminate some of the ball handling issues. And that's why, to me, it's not a big deal. Is because they are freshmen and they're playing up a level and it's new. But I'm surprised that they've had I think it was 24 turnovers against Stanford
I
or
stopped counting at 20.
yeah. Yeah. So that, to me, that's pretty surprising because I thought having those two back there, and then with the way that Sharp is a good passer, that Brooks is a senior, I thought that would keep those down a little bit.
Sean, looking forward, what does this past week tell you about this team?
I mean, I think it tells us that there's definitely talent to work with, but at the same time, not nearly as much talent as 2 years ago in terms of, is this a championship contending team? And I know last year on the podcast, we kind of talked, this is ideally a year to set up next year. Now, granted, is that true now? I guess that's a little more debatable, but I think overall it's I do have confidence going into this week with two Big Ten teams, but I think a lot of stuff that needs to be ironed out pretty quickly, which is not really able to be done against kind of some low mid majors or mid majors at the Dean Dome, where normally you have 10 plus games to do that over November, December.
I think one of the things that always gets worked out during these early season games that you're not seeing this year is the division of minutes amongst guys. You start to see a normal rotation, and I think we didn't really see that this past week. I mean, you know who the top 3 minute getters are going to get, but after that, there's a little bit of kind of plug and play, and I think the coaching staff is still feeling that out. How do you guys feel like the minutes are going to work out, Sean? I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll start first with the bigs. It's a luxury to have four talented, really fives, more or less. Obviously, Garrison's been playing the four and been doing a pretty good job at it. But UNC's best teams, they've had three very strong bigs, and exactly kind of from a minute perspective, and they're able to be kind of rotated in and out. With four, it kind of makes things a little, who's playing well at the time, who's playing well with each other, and you don't really get into, it's more of a per game basis on a flow. So, I think, will we see, maybe it's Kessler who has his minutes dwindled and Sharp's increase? I don't know. I mean, I think trying to at least get into a little more of how things are gonna go, but there could be times where Brooks isn't playing well or Baycott, and you need, one of the other guys to step up. You mentioned the shooting with the freshman Johnson. and Walton. And I think for me, rewatching the Texas game, there's a few minutes, and I don't know what the plus minus was, but when it had Love, Johnson, and Walton out on the floor, and I just thought the spacing was pretty decent with that, with the ability for two shooters on the wings, as well as kind of then that letting RJ be the dominant ball handler instead of going back and forth. So I did kind of like that lineup. I would say to me, Walton has been more surprised. I'd say a surprise. I was kind of low on him during the summer, just in terms of his quickness, and I knew he could shoot, but how is he going to be able to play defensively? And it does look like he's kind of leaned out a little bit, and not that he's a defensive stud by any means, but I was, I kind of want to see him get more minutes, just given his 3-point shooting ability, as well as some of his length out there.
Sherrell, what about you? How do you see the minute situation shaping up, and do you see it happening anytime soon?
Yeah, I think we have to see the deal with Anthony Harris's health. I think that's a big deal. I think Andrew Platek, I think what you've seen with him is his minutes kind of vacillate between, I guess, 16, 17, 18, 19, something like that. And then I think against Texas 6. So I think his will be matchup dependent for teams who kind of have those stud athletes on the wing like Texas. I think maybe he's not the best fit for teams who don't have that. Then I think he can do a lot of things, and he can help. I know he's very polarizing among the fan base, but I do think there are things he can do to help. From there, I think once Harris gets back, you integrate him more kind of at the 2 guard. And, another thing, and I'm switching again, but another thing about Caleb Love and RJ Davis, you have to realize is that both of these guys have had the ball in their hands their entire lives. And, Caleb, even though he played off ball, he had the ball, he
was still the trigger.
Yeah, it was still the trigger guy. And RJ Davis the same way. And I would say it's even more of a transition for Caleb because RJ played with more talented players, both on AAU and in high school. And so Caleb, for him, it was just kind of, I get the ball, go down the court, I do my thing. If that's a pass, great. If it's me taking a shot, probably even better because, he's the best player on the team. So it just takes time to learn, like, okay, I need to do this. And in secondary, I go to the corner, or on this secondary, I look for the trailing guy, and all that stuff processing at once is just a lot to handle. And, over the years, I've talked to so many parents and people close to these players, and they all talk about how just, they say, oh, my son is thinking too much, or
Yeah.
he's thinking too much. And the difference to me is that the folks who figure it out and the folks who don't figure it out is 100% confidence. And the guys who figure it out is because their confidence never wavers, or if it does, it's very slight. And the guys who sometimes take a year or two is because they got down on themselves and
Right.
just start snowballing, where they make a mistake and then they get down on themselves, and because they get down on themselves, they make another mistake, and on it goes. And I don't think Caleb is that type. So I don't feel the need to defend, but I feel the need to explain, because it is a big jump from St. Louis high school basketball
Right.
to playing against Texas in a nationally televised game.
I just want to say, and I know that Texas has been somewhat of a bee in the bonnet for Roy Williams, especially at North Carolina. But how is it that every time, regardless of how regularly North Carolina plays Texas, how is it that every time Texas runs out on the court against Carolina, they have 3 guys that are really athletic guards that are like 21 years old? I swear, and I may be making this up, so don't fact check me, but it seems like every time that they match up with the Tar Heels, Texas has a very old, wise, cagey, athletic backcourt. Like guys that are all like 6'3" to 6'5". They can all hit big shots when they need to, and they've all been in that system for a little while. It's uncanny to me.
And
I think that was, that was what scared, looking at the betting lines before the game, that was what scared me off of taking UNC. It was just looking at Texas, and you see their experienced guards, juniors, seniors that have been there, done that. They did have some athletic bigs to match up with UNC, and then you add Greg Brown, kind of a top 10 athletic freshman. So that was kind of the worry, thing that worried me going into the game, was really that guard experience. And of course, Matt Coleman had one of the games of his life. of
It
his life.
matters early, man, especially this time of the year. Like it matters early in the season when you've got those guys you can lean on. Sherrell, you were going to say something?
I was just gonna say it's different from the previous Texas losses because after those games, you're like, man, those guys out physical Carolina. They out rebounded
Yeah,
them. They beat them up. Carolina beat them up, beat Texas up this time.
especially in the
But
second half.
yeah,
Yes,
but Matt Coleman just having that senior leadership and it wasn't good in the moment, but it was a good experience for RJ and Caleb, I think, to see what, a senior guard playing at the top of his game, probably like Sean said, probably maybe the best he can play to see what that's like, and they'll be better for it.
absolutely. And I think it's important for fans to remember too. They made Coleman hit a good shot. Like it's not like he got a layup. Like he hit a good shot, a contested shot, and you can bemoan R.J. Davis being the short guy guarding him all you want to, but kid hit a big shot. That's what upperclassmen do. Sean, your thoughts on Caleb Love? I think you throw something in there.
Yeah, one thing, just in terms of the shot, once again, it was a heck of a shot. You go back and watch, I think it was right around the 5 minute mark. Matt Coleman did the same exact move from the same exact spot to hit kind of the step back fadeaway. So you kind of knew it was coming, but once again, he's a quick guard. RJ's, still getting the hang of it defensively. There've been, I think, countless times he's been beaten right off the dribble, but
Hmm.
once again, he wasn't known as kind of he's known as a scorer and a playmaker coming in. So he's, getting better defensively, and to go against a guard that quick with that experience is tough early on. But in terms of Caleb Love, I think Joey, you had mentioned his shot mechanics, and that was something I'd been trying to focus on when kind of going back through the games. And once again, he's 3 of 19 from three. This isn't a lights out shooter. He shot 34% in the Nike EYBL, so it's not like he was a 40% shooter there. But the positive is that go back to last year with Keeling, and it was just a struggle for him with kind of the new 3 point line in terms of just getting the ball up there without
Hmm.
the dribble. And with Love, I mean, he's comfortable still, once again, just catching and shooting from NBA 3 point line. So it's easy to get there. I think it's just a little bit more kind of focus. Sometimes his back has been, he's kind of been leaning in with the upper body, or maybe, short armed it a little bit. I don't really know what went on with that air ball from the wing, because he was wide open. Maybe, probably just got in his head a little bit.
Is
But
that the one he chicken winged? There was
I
one
thought
that he
that, I
chicken
mean,
winged pretty bad.
there was one in the first half he chicken winged, and then there's another one that just kind of was in and out. So I think for him is just kind of continuing to shoot good open shots, not forcing it. And once again, with him, his whole thing is he's so strong going to his left, whether that's pick and roll. There was a pull up jump shot he had going left, and it would just look so smooth and so effortless. And it was a swish from about 15, 17, but he has struggled going to the right. And once again, I think it was during the Georgia Tech Kentucky game. One of the announcers says, this isn't AAU where you're the best player on the team and you go 1 for 6, 2 for 7 to start, and it's no problem. You just keep on shooting. You don't really have that luxury, especially at UNC. And I think these games are just kind of bringing, getting these reps out, and I think there is a lot of positive to work with going forward.
Yeah, and Joey, going back to the surprise, this is my last point on that. One thing I am surprised by is that the team isn't getting as many open shots, especially on the wing, as I expected. I thought that with the bigs inside and with everybody trying to contain them inside, they would say, okay, we're gonna double and triple and quadruple team you in the post, and we'll leave these guys open. And that's happened to some degree, but I guess the defensive um, players they've gone against on the wing have either been really athletic or really long, because there haven't been, to me, that I can remember, a ton of just wide open shots. Like Loves was one of them. I think Playtech has had a couple, but there haven't been a ton of clean looks, and that was something I expected to see a lot of, considering how strong they are on the inside.
I would think that that's something too that as opposing coaches get more tape or get more film on how UNC uses the bigs and using those double posts, you got to think that'll they'll start changing the way you expected to see them to change. Sherrell, logic would tell me that. Maybe I'm wrong. That's probably why I'm hosting and not coaching. Uh, so we talked about a couple of the early deficiencies that we've seen, and I'm kind of hesitant to call them warts yet, but some things that could be concerning. of those things, aside from free throws, which I'm not one of those that are going to say they're a terrible free throw shooting team. They didn't shoot well against Texas. But what do you guys feel like are some of the easiest things that could be tweaked through a couple more games? You always hear that coaches can coach better after a loss. Well, UNC had their first loss last week. What do you guys think are some of the things that can be tweaked a little sooner rather than later, or things that can be fixed as this team is rounding into who they're going to be in a couple of months? Sherrell?
Yeah, the turnover is number one for me because that stuff is just being strong with the ball. It's knowing where to go. It's just being smart a lot of the times. There weren't many, I would say, turnovers where somebody was, to me, where they were somewhere in the wrong place, or they were trying to make an aggressive play. It was just a lot of just be smarter and think a little more before you throw the pass. So I think that stuff can get cleaned up a ton. I mean, you have to. You can't go multiple games with 20 plus turnovers. So I would look to that first and foremost before anything. And especially
Yeah,
especially as the two guards get more experience, they'll be able to handle that better.
Sean?
yeah, I would agree. I mean, right now they're averaging, I think, 10 assists and almost 16 turnovers a game. So, I mean, obviously the turnovers is high, but I think you would expect a little bit better on the assist side. And I think, one thing that will come with the experience, especially from the two guards, and especially with, getting healthy, and adding another one in there. But right now, and once again, it's only 4 games in, so you can, extrapolate it throughout the rest of the season. But I think they're ranked 92nd in tempo, so by far the slowest of any Roy Williams teams in terms of national rankings. They've been at 71 to 72 possessions, and I think we all thought that was going to increase in terms of, they weren't going to be at Kobe White speed, but in terms of playing faster. And so far, they haven't. So I think, that can be another thing that not necessarily gets cleaned up, but in terms of things that improves on going forward.
All right, we'll take a quick break right here so we can let some of the national folks run their airtime to sell ads or air ads to sell things. We'll be right back to talk a little bit about Iowa here on the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. All right, thanks for sticking around. You're listening to the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. I'm Joey Powell. With me, as always, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. Guys, we've talked about what the UNC team has looked like in their early games so far this season. Got 2 big tests. Sean, you mentioned it earlier. Specifically coming up, they're going to be playing in Iowa City against the Fighting Luka Garzas. And they'll also have a game against another ranked opponent from the Big Ten in Ohio State. Boys, how do we feel like that's going to shake out? I've always felt like the Big Ten's style of play is tough for North Carolina physically, but once they start running, they've been able to kind of outdo them. I'm specifically thinking about Tom Izzo teams. But Sean, how do you feel like this team, as it sits right now, is going to match up with these 2 Big Ten squads?
I mean, I always think Carolina should never lose to a Big Ten team. And
There's a
unfortunately,
lot of fans out there that would agree with you.
yeah, I mean, and going into this game, Iowa, top 5 team, Luka Garza. They haven't played anybody yet, so that's a positive. They played, everybody's been talking about Luka Garza dropping 30 plus by halftime, but they haven't played anybody. When you look at them, look, it's going to be a tough one with Garza, but once again, that's UNC's strong point. I think Joe Wieskamp, was about to mispronounce his last name. That guy's a pretty talented player. I mean, he's potential, I'd say, late second round, 2-way type of guy. So he's talented. And they have some, shooters, they're shooting at a very high clip. That's kind of what you would expect. But
Yep.
in terms of overall talent and experience, going into the season, I think UNC was a 4.5 point underdog. Ken Palm has them Iowa by 3. I would like to say I see UNC going 2-0, but realistically, they'll probably go 1-1. But once again, I think, they match up well with Iowa. So I'm not going to be surprised if they go over there, into the Midwest and come out with a victory.
Sherrell, how do you feel about these upcoming games?
Yeah, Wieskamp was my kind of the guy to watch for Iowa. Like everybody knows Garza is going to do his thing. And, I do think he's a good player. Last year, he was pretty dominant. And yes, they haven't played anyone this year, but I think he's shown enough over the last couple of years for Carolina to recognize him as a good player and treat him as such. So that always means when it comes to Carolina defending a player who's really good in the post on the opposing team, it all comes down to whether or not the supporting cast of that player can hit their threes. So I think this is a big game for someone like Leaky Black. I laugh because, again, another divisive, polarizing player among media and fans and everything. But he's someone whose length I think could bother the perimeter players of Iowa, and if they're able to just keep them to a reasonably low percentage from three, 33, 32%, something like that, and kind of maybe encourage those guys to shoot a little bit more, since Garza is the key to their team, then I think North Carolina's bigs can handle him between the four of them. And then it's just a matter of whether or not those supporting cast guys hit their threes. On the other side, offensively, there's going to be opportunity for Carolina to get him into foul trouble. Again, I don't think he's faced a front line like this, maybe in the last couple of years, certainly not this year. So it'll be a challenge for him. But I'm not going to predict Carolina to come out of there and win against the number 5 team in the country, but they're certainly capable of doing it. It's just a matter of whether or not, a couple of threes go in, the defense, I think, is an underrated story for Carolina this year too. We haven't talked about it, but they are turning into a phenomenal defensive
Where did
team.
this come from? They've got some tenacious dog in them on the defensive end.
Yeah, and you don't expect that from freshmen, just because, again, the speed changes, the size, the athleticism. You don't expect a team starting 2 freshmen to be good defensively. I mean, we've seen it with other schools who are dependent on one and done type players having to change their defensive styles because the freshmen aren't ready to play man-to-man defense, and that hasn't happened with Carolina yet. So that's another storyline going there, is that I do think Carolina can limit them offensively. They're not going to score, in my opinion, 90 points against Carolina on Tuesday night. So it's just a matter of those shooters on the wing stopping them, and then if Carolina can get a couple shots to go in, I think they have a good chance, especially with no fans. Same thing with Ohio State. I don't think it's that much different at all.
I love that you mentioned that. It's if Iowa wins against North Carolina, it will be because Luka Garza and the rest of that team earned it. Like physically, I'm like you. They haven't had the test so far, so it will be interesting to see if they're able to match up. But to the point that you made about the North Carolina defensive effort so far, we didn't get any of those indications from Roy Williams. And I don't know if he was surprised when they started seeing live action, because that's usually one of his biggest qualms and his biggest beefs with his team, is that they don't want to play defense. But over these first few games, I've seen multiple shot clock violations caused by Tar Heel defense. I've seen, balls stolen off of side out plays. I've seen Day'Ron Sharp had a great deflection on an inbounds pass from the inline in one of the games last week. These are things that usually it takes Roy and the staff some time to get these instilled in these guys. So it's really neat to see so many of the young players figuring this out early, and we'll see if they can maintain it. But early results have been good. Sean.
Yeah, I think, the block percentage on the team has been fantastic. And obviously with 2 bigs, in terms of Iowa, just looking at kind of the most frequented lineups, they do have Joe Wieskamp playing the 4. And once again, I think that's going to be the thing we talk about all season, is these teams are playing an undersized 4. And how does that look with Greg Brown? I thought it gave him a little bit of confidence because he felt like he could get to the basket, basically at will. And then that kind of led to him hitting his only 3-pointer, when you just have to give a jab step and you get the guy off of you and maybe you're a little more open. So, I think that's going to be a storyline for a lot of games, and even this one. So, is Brooks going to be able to contend on the perimeter? And then on offense, will UNC be able to make them pay, with a smaller defender in the post? So I think that's a key. Sherrell mentioned Leaky Black, so I've got to kind of bring him up. And, he's been up and down. I think it was a UNLV game. It kind of, one possession kind of, or actually both UNLV and Texas, there are possessions where on defense, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, but UNLV, he got beat off the dribble, one dribble, just completely outclassed. But then the guy, instead of taking the basket, kicked it out the perimeter. Leaky saw it beforehand, sprints out, blocks the shot. And that was kind of the most active I've seen him. And that kind of just showed, one, kind of the weakness of maybe on ball at times against quicker guys, but two, what could be, with his length and mobility, kind of what else he brings to the table. And then Texas, offensively, here he is taking one of those patented 18-foot pull-up jump shots. He
Foot
misses
inside
it,
the line.
but for him, he eventually gets the ball back, gets fouled, and makes 2 free throws. So I think, really going forward is how focused is he in the game? Once again, Texas, up until the 5-minute mark, he was kind of just, he was running up and down, but wasn't making any type of impact offensively on the game. And when you have 2 bigs, and then 2 freshman guards, you can't just get nothing from your wing, from a scoring, shooting style of play. So I think that's something. And in that first half, under the 5-minute mark, there was one possession. It ended up being a turnover, but he just drove to the basket, got in the paint, lofted a pass to Kessler. Ended up being a jump ball, but that's what he needs to do in terms of forcing the action, in terms of looking to drive or looking to just be a presence. Because if he's not doing anything, once again, that's how UNC is going to go into those scoring lulls, and that's going to put a lot more pressure on the 2 guards. That it's not a Jackie Manuel where you have Raymond Felton and Rashad McCants playing the 1 and 2. So he really needs to kind of be in the action, and whether it's rebounding, pushing the ball up the court, he just needs to be involved and
Something.
Yeah, exactly. Which we saw it at times, and he hit the big shot against Stanford, and he did some things. We just, I think, need more of it with the group around him.
So Sherrell, I saw your eyes light up as if you had something that was just burning a hole in your soul to share with the listeners. What do you got?
No, not particularly. I just know Leaky has become a hot button issue from everybody who covers UNC basketball, and I think I don't want to say I've become a defender, but I do think that sometimes people can be a little bit hard on him, and it's because the wing at Carolina has typically been someone who knocks down threes, who can hit open shots, who isn't scared to take shots, who has a really significant offensive impact. And when that's not there, I think it can be a little bit tougher to see how he helps UNC win. Now, I do agree with John that the biggest issue now with Leaky is consistency. I think, the whole idea of you show me you can do something one time, I expect you to do it every time. With Leaky against Stanford, I thought he had 4 turnovers, which it felt a little more like 6 or 7. But
the
he had
timing of them made it feel that way. I
yeah,
agree
the
with you.
timing of them made him. Yeah, but other than that, I thought it was a fine, a solid floor game from him, because I know that he's not going to be a 20-point scorer. Now,
Right.
the question is, it's 2 separate issues. It is, can Carolina be as good of a team as it wants to be with someone at the small forward spot who maybe isn't, the most offensively gifted or greatest shooter in the world? And the other thing is, well, Leaky is good at what he does, or solid at what he does. Like, it can be both things, that maybe the ceiling of the team is lower because of his inability to shoot and score, but he also is the best thing for UNC at this particular moment. I think it can be both of those things at the same time. But I've really been impressed with his rebounding. I think he's averaging 7 rebounds a game, which is big. So that's activity. I think there are a few players in the country who one game can guard Zaire Williams, who is a stud wing and potential lottery pick, and the next day have a couple of possessions on Greg Brown, who's a different type of stud elite athlete wing and also a future lottery pick. So I think that's what he brings to the table, and it's just a matter of fine tuning, as Sean said, his ability to impact the game offensively at times, because he does go stretches where you kind of forget he's on the court, because especially on the offensive end. So it's just a matter of, if you're not going to be able to hit open shots, then, be a willing cutter, be a willing screener, continue to hit the boards hard, make sure you're getting back on defense, and always have just simple stuff like always have your arms out because you're
Yeah.
6'8". It's hard to shoot over you if you're 6'8". So I just think it's a fascinating dynamic in that you talk about ceiling versus floor, and then the freshmen and how do you integrate them, and is the difference in the ability of the freshmen to shoot, does that compensate for their inability to maybe defend and do some of the things that he can do on the ball? And I think that's a question Roy Williams and the staff are trying to figure out.
The old saying of timing is everything. I think that you look at some of the goods of Leaky Black, and when the timing comes in, like the layup at the end of the game against Stanford, or the free throws against, I think he was the one that hit the free throws against Texas. I mean, those are valuable. And then you also have to juxtapose that with the bad timing of some of the unforced errors and the turnovers. And you just kind of hope that those things will start to level out, because statistically, I think North Carolina and specifically the staff will take the stats that he's giving them right now. You'd like to see those
Right.
turnovers come down, but your point about the rebounds is an incredibly strong one, Sherrell.
And I
Fellas,
don't think his turnovers aren't forced. That I think that's the frustrating part with
right.
people, is
Kicking
that sometimes he'll just kind of dribble himself into trouble,
it.
or he'll pass into trouble. So when you talked about what can get better, he can get better at that. The guards can the whole team can get better at that.
Fellas, anything else you want to say about the current state of the squad before we put a bow on the show?
I've got two things.
I said anything, so I mean, two things counts.
Two completely different things. One, I know it kind of brought it up earlier, but fast break and transition, that's one thing where it just looks like they're still pretty lost in terms of, when you think of UNC, you think of fast break, getting the ball to the basket, getting some easy buckets. And right now, even when they're attacking, it doesn't look like they still know what exactly they're supposed to do, whether that's pushing the ball up the court, or, when you get the ball on the wing, there's been a few possessions on the left-hand wing where, they missed a guy streaking down the court, so the feel hasn't been there. And hopefully that can continue to improve, because once again, that's going to be an area that they need to excel at in terms of, putting the pressure on the other teams and getting baskets. And then the other is a guy that we haven't really talked about at all today, but Armando Bacot, and have been very impressed with his play early. Last year, I think for him, it was sometimes thinking too much. And there's a possession when we played UVA last year where he just caught it, did kind of one move, spun the other way, and hit a jump shot. And it was just like very short and compact. And I feel that's what he's been doing a lot this time. I mean, he's been killing it on the boards. It looks like I think it was one possession, he got the rebound and he was out of bounds, but he just went up off 2 feet, exploded for a dunk. And I think he's been playing really well. And it looks like he's been putting in a lot of work in the off season. So wanted to mention his name as somebody that had been very pleasantly surprised with, and hopefully that can continue.
Absolutely great point. I mentioned to some guys in our Slack group the other day that Armando's thing that jumped out at me last year was, to your point, it seems like there was a lot of unnecessary footwork, which can usually be a result of some indecision and inability to commit and make that quick move. This year, especially in his really, really good post moves, they've been very, very minimal wasted movement, very quick. Just very tight, concise spin moves to the basket, which for a big guy like that, that's all you can ask for, is that kind of footwork.
And one last thing for me before we close, Walker Kessler and Puff Johnson, we haven't talked about them either. I think we've talked about every single player on the roster. I'll just go ahead and say Sterling Manley and Walker Miller and Dewey. So
Baby Jet.
Baby Jet. I'm sorry, KJ, my bad. So for those two, remember they were out for some time, both of them at least 2 weeks with contact tracing and all that. So I think it'll be really good for them over the next couple of weeks. Typically, we would say, oh, it's December and exams are over, so they can focus on basketball. Well, they've kind of been focused on basketball with, classes being online and everything, but they'll be able to get, back in the groove of practice over the next couple of weeks. And I think you'll see a playing time increase for those guys as they reintegrate into the system, just after being out for so long. Because it does take some time, especially when you're missing those practices early or kind of in the middle of the preseason. That's an important time for installation and for just repping things. So as they are able to get back and practice more, I think you'll see them back in games more too.
Well, fellas, we hope that we see you back more because you guys bring so much to this podcast. We appreciate you being with us. Hey, 50 minutes, right? Like we've struggled through the dead period and through the summer to bring news and bring content to everybody. Now we got games, and all of a sudden we banged out 50 minutes of discussion about this current team and who could potentially be getting offers. But we appreciate you being here. Thank you for being here, guys. Thank you, listeners and viewers, for being here. If you're not viewing us, be sure to check us out on YouTube. Go to the Inside Carolina channel and subscribe. If you're not subscribing to our podcast right now, be sure to go ahead and do that. There's going to be a lot more coming as the basketball season rolls on. It's going to be nothing but more games, more games, more games. Well, there actually could be less games considering COVID, but you get my point. But for Sherrell McMillan, for Sean Moran, I'm Joey Powell. We appreciate you guys listening. Thank you to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. Always hit up InsideCarolina.com for any content, any news. If you need to hear about it, it's going to be there. But we appreciate you guys listening. We'll hit you next time.